Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Silver Years. My name is DK. I'm very happy to be here, and I humbly thank you for joining me. Today is a new segment of My Story Time. My Story Time is where I tell my story, unscripted, as a way to counter the ever changing official narrative of history, his story. Because no one, not even AI, can tell my life story as a direct reflection of the times in which I lived better than me. And this is where I'm telling it. The story that wants to be told today is about my brother who left us. He passed in 2004. Now, what made me really think about this was, the last couple of videos I've done, the closing room wake up call, and then the breaking the rules times five. I mentioned my brother and how he had HIV/AIDS and how he was adopted, or he was told he was adopted, and then we learned later that he was our brother, um, half brother, I guess. But his all his life, he was told he was adopted. So for all he knew, until he was 18 years old, he was adopted, and he was raised as such. But he was raised by my grandmother, my mother's mother. My grandmother did not like to be called grandma or anything like that. We had to call her mom. So our grandmother insisted that we call her mom. Well, it created confusion calling our mother mom and calling her mom. So we separated it by calling her mom Crack. So we called our grandmother Mom Crack. Long story with that. I'm not going to get into that here in this little thing. Now, my brother was 3 years older than I was, and I was the oldest, the old firstborn daughter, and I was raised as the oldest. He was not raised in our household. He was raised by Mom Crack, by our grandmother. But he didn't know she was his grandmother. She was just the mother who adopted him. Now, he was he had displayed early on in his life high potential for creativity. He could draw. He was very, very gifted from an artistic perspective from a very young age, and that showed itself pretty quickly. The problem he had with it was that Mom Crack used to insist that he demonstrate and show off his abilities every time her friends would come to visit. So he got to feeling like he was a circus animal expecting to perform every time her people came around. And so he just outright protested and refused to draw again. And most of his life he would not draw after that. After his youth, he wouldn't draw. Um, there was a point, I would say he was probably, 12 maybe ish when Mom Crack got an organ. She bought an organ and decided she wanted to learn how to play an organ. And it was like kind of a church organ. And I mean, it had the pedals and several keyboards and everything. Ultimately, I ended up having to deal with that organ many, many decades later, and I couldn't give that thing away. But she loved that organ, and she took lessons and learned how to play that organ. Well, what he did was sit back and watch the lessons. He didn't get lessons, but he paid attention to the lessons. And the next thing you know, he's playing the organ like he's been doing it all of his life. And he could play any kind of keyboard instrument. He got so skilled. I don't even know that I would call it. I mean, he had the skills, but he also had the talent, he could play any kind of keyboard. And the next thing you know, he's playing the clarinet, he's playing the flute, he's playing the violin. He could play just about anything he could get a hold of, he was playing. And he was very diverse. He could write music, read music, he could play, and the next thing, and then he ultimately went into composing musicals and things like that. He was really skilled, but again, he wouldn't draw. He refused to draw. After that, he just would not have anything to do with it. Now, when he was in his teenage years, he did excuse me, he did date, but because it was expected, it was the time. You couldn't come out as being gay during these days, but ultimately he did, because when he got out of high school, um, he always was gay, and ultimately, he floundered a little bit, and then he got out of high school, and he floundered for a while because he didn't know where he fit. It was kind of a confusing time, especially if you were gay. During these years, it was a confusing time, and it was hard to see where you would fit in and how you would get a job and how you would navigate. And he was no exception to this. He had these experiences, and he had a lot of other emotional things that really weighed upon him. He wanted to know who his parents were, like many adopted children, and it was always a big secret, and he was always kept from that information. um, but he had HIV that ultimately became AIDS, and it did make him sick, and it did ultimately end his life. But um, it wasn't because of that, his gayness, that he got this condition. It was because of drug use during his floundering days. Okay. He was not a drug addict all of his life. He had a point in time, just like many people do. And this is where the condition um, emerged originally. And it took a while to kind of connect those dots and figure that out. But ultimately, he moved up to San Francisco, and he found a lot of people that he could resonate with. Now, a lot of his friends and companions and support system were performers who, and this club isn't there anymore, but there used to be a huge, it was like a La Cage aux Folles kind of thing, um, with male performers dressing and performing as females. And it was called Finocchios. So a lot of his friends were performers. They were so talented, really. And they that's where they worked, at Finocchio's. But he got in with an underground, and he started writing productions and doing things, and it was a really good place, I think, for him to be able to express his creativities, and I think he felt like he fit in there. Um, but for the rest of us, when he became about after 18, he got real aggressive in his pursuit of who his parents were. And at some point, somebody had to fess up. So then he was told that our mother, the mother, all of us had the same mother, that our mother was his mother. And okay, that filled in part of it, but it didn't fill in who his father was. So he always had a hole in him, a hole in his heart, because he couldn't connect to who his father was, and all of the connections that may come. Well, what I would call the generational inheritance, because of course he had it. It came through his bloodline, whether you know it or not, it's part of you. And he felt he was missing part of himself, and not knowing and having the information and the knowledge to fill in that empty space with who he came from and what he was connected to genetically. And I know that when I found out during a New Year's Eve visit from all my sisters, when I found out that he was our brother, after the fact, I called my father and I said, "What do you know about this? Because this is the first I've heard." So then he proceeds to answer my questions as best he knew how, because his attitude was, "I'm staying out of it." He knew about it, of course, from the beginning, but as far as the rift between our mother and Mom Crack, um, he wasn't going to get into the middle of that, and he certainly wasn't going to blow cover um, at all. But he felt that my mother always wanted to claim him back and didn't have the courage to approach her own mother about it. And that's a whole other can of worms unto itself. There's a lot. Families have a lot of stuff. So my brother, it, it it was sad, but he got caught kind of in the middle of that, and it tortured him for a long time. Ultimately, he met a man called Owen, and they decided to get married. I think this is before marriages were legal in California, but they had like a commitment ceremony, which was like a wedding, okay? And it was at a church and everything. And they decided that they were going to get married. We called Owen Aunt Owen. Owen was wonderful. He was very committed and devoted, and they were very, very nice couple. And then Owen took care of him all the way to the end. Owen was wonderful. But anyway, when they got married, we all jumped in the van and we drove from Orange County up to San Francisco. I don't know, there must have been 8 of us in this minivan, and we all went up for this wedding. And it was truly, truly an experience. All the women were dressed as men and tuxes, and all the men were dressed as women in emerald evening gowns and jewels and sparklies and hair, and it was really an interesting experience and fun, way fun. But my brother, his best or man of honor or whatever he wanted to call it, was a young man named Val. But Val had AIDS, and Val got sick, and Val could not attend this wedding. And so my brother had to find a last minute replacement. So he ended up contacting, and you know what? I cannot for the life of me remember the name of the person he contacted, but she ended up being who she was the queen of the drag queens. Because I think, from my understanding, the drag queens had a group, and there was always somebody who was dominant. Okay. And she was the queen. And a part of her was not too happy at being second choice to Val. She was not happy to be a fill-in call, to replace Val, who got sick. So she made us all wait. So the wedding was like 2 hours late while we waited for her to arrive. And she did arrive in great fanfare. And our mother would just say to the grandkids, I remember telling, my daughter and my nieces, savor this, because most people in their entire lives never have an experience like this. And I think at some level she was right. And after the wedding, or after the ceremony, there was a reception in the uh, in the back part of the church, and all of these gay performers from Finocchio's and their friends, and there were so many of them. There were so many of them. There were a lot of them. They put my mother on a chair like a throne, and they put her up on a pedestal, and they all kind of lined up and were, oohing and awing in worship to my mother, because most of them had been disowned by their families, and they just couldn't believe that my brother, that the family related to my brother would come and support this and be part of this. And this happened probably around the late 90s, maybe 1999. It was, in the late 90s. So my mother didn't know what to do with it. My mother was very, very uncomfortable. But they were in awe of her, that the mother would come and support. And I just thought it was great. And I told my mother, just say thank you, and just take it in, because she really did. She did a loving, caring thing, and I know that it was hard for her in the choices she had to make, and there's all kinds of reasons for the way things played out the way they did, without getting into blame. But she stood by him, in that, and all of his community were in awe of it and were very, very happy about it. Now, about a year before he died, he was adamant, and I want to say this too. After he married Owen and they were living in San Francisco, and I was working in San Jose for a couple years after I left Montana. So this is late 90s. Um, I we used to go up, my daughter and I used to go up to the city. I loved going into San Francisco. San Francisco is one of my favorite. It used to be. I haven't been there in a long time, and I don't want to break my heart going to see it today. But it used to be one of my favorite cities. Of all the cities I visited around the world, I loved San Francisco. And so we used to drive up there just to get away. And we would meet my brother and Aunt Owen at Haight Ashbury district because my daughter liked to check out all the shops and all that. But all of the clothing and all of the things for the drag queens, all of those shops and tailors and just everything you could imagine, it catered to all these. So it was really vibrant and colorful and filled with diversity, and it was very fun. So we used to go up frequently to visit them and just hang out at the Haight and just walk and eat and just spend life doing it. But I remember my brother saying one time walking down the street how he really felt he was going to get my mom to tell him who his father was because he really needed to know. And I said to him, "I'm sorry." I said, "She's never going to tell you." I said, "She's going to take that to her grave. That's just how she is." And of course, you've heard me talk about the silent generation, and this is it. And she's going to take it to her. She's never going to tell you. And that saddened me for him. But about a year before he died, he decided he was going to sit down privately and have a conversation with her and try to extract that information. And he had my sister number two, on hold. He was going to call and let her know what happened after the meeting. And he and Owen went. Now Owen worked for a private investigator and he had for years. So Owen was planning on tracking down this person once he had the name. Once he had the information, Owen was going to go to work. And afterward, my sister called me and said, "Oh my God, you'll never believe what happened. You'll never believe it." And I said, "Okay, try me." She said, she gave him a name. I said, "Oh, that's great. I'm really happy to hear it. What'd she give him?" "John Smith." Okay, no, I'm not kidding you. She gave him the name, John Smith. And my sister and I just groaned, and I said, I told him she wasn't ever going to give him the name. And I guess Owen tried to take the information she gave him and do something with it, which was a dead end in every direction. So my brother ultimately never got what he sought. He never got connected to his paternal side, to the paternal side of his family. And before he died, he did send a long letter. You could tell by the envelope. He mailed it to my mother, and sister number two was there when she got it. And she looked at it, and my sister was like, "Aren't you going to open it?" And she said, "No." And she just took the letter and she threw it in the trash. And that was it. That was it. She wouldn't read whatever he had to say. She felt it was going to not be nice. She didn't want to hear it. And she threw his letter away. So to this day, don't know what he said, don't know how he felt. I mean, sort of. And then ultimately, in 2004 was when he died. And she was there at the end. And that was that. So I can only imagine the burden and the other things that, my mother carries as a direct result of this. But, my brother did pass, not feeling he got what he needed. And there is more, obviously, more to this story, a lot more. But for now, all these things I did just made me think of him. And I thought, I'm just going to talk about him because he is gone, and he was truly had so many gifts, and he just had so many emotional issues that it would have been nice if some of this could have been clarified for him before he passed, and I'm sorry about that. So, in conclusion, and for whatever it's worth, this is my little protest against his history. This is me telling my story my way. For the record, it's my story, and I'm sticking to it. I would love to hear your stories as well, so please feel free to share your stories in the comments. So until next time, be well, choose love, and thank you. Thank you for listening. Goodbye for now.